Hello, we are back again, and we're going to continue to look at the phrase, the fit of the model with the data, and deconstruct it or break it down into its different components so that we can get a better sense of what is actually meant by our saying the fit of the model with the data. And so we have just done a presentation where we talked about what is meant by the data. And so that's what you're seeing up here. This is from the previous presentation. We're talking about what is meant by the data. And we learned a couple of important takeaway points from that presentation. One is that I just want you to appreciate the straightforwardness of multiple regression in at least one important regard. Because if you're reading a textbook about multiple regression, you might be feeling overwhelmed by a variety of topics with three-dimensional regression planes. They might show you, to show they have an impressive three-dimensional printer that they can, put in the textbook or something. Really isn't all that useful, I don't think. And you'll have, all these assumptions that you need to get into and understand the details of. And there's lots of matters that a textbook can get you deep into the weeds on and into the details of, and it may all seem very overwhelming. And of course, that's part of what we're doing with this the essence of regression, is to get down to brass tacks and what is most essential to know about regression. Well, that's all true. There are those technicalities and ways of getting deep into the weeds on regression. But one thing we talked about when we talked about the data is how straightforward data collection is. When we're using regression analysis, we typically have research designs that do not involve the active curation and manipulation of an independent variable. What we're usually doing in our research design when we use regression analysis is that we are measuring phenomena that already exist in the natural environment, but now we're measuring it and we're putting numbers to it. But if we're measuring organizational commitment, for example, well, someone has people have levels of organizational commitment whether we measure it or not. What we're doing in research designs that get analyzed with regression analysis typically is we're now measuring organizational commitment. So we're putting numbers to it, but they're already naturally occurring phenomena out there, one's level of organizational commitment or one's level of job satisfaction or whatever it may be. We're just going out there and measuring it. And so what we saw then, and this is an important thing to keep in mind, in fact, we did this in terms of a theater of the mind exercise, where each of you imagined yourself being in a room with 10 other people. So we had a sample size of 11, including you. And I handed each of you a stack of measures. And for data collection for research designs, typically analyzed with regression, the data collection is quite straightforward. So we're handing each of the 11 people a stack of measures. And I asked you, well, how many measures would be in that stack of measures? And you thought about it and you came up with some answers. Anyway, what the answer was, that it'd be a total, for this example here, of 4 measures. So we'd have a measure of the outcome variable, y hat, which in this case is organizational commitment. We would also have a measure of each of our predictor variables, so measure of job satisfaction, a measure of employee salary, so we would ask someone what their employee salary was, basically, and a measure of our third predictor variable, positiveness of work environment. So we'd have a total of 4 measures in this stack of measures that we would give to each of the 11 people, including yourself, in this theater of the mind. So you'd be receiving a stack of measures of 4 measures, and you fill them out. And you've done your data collection that's going to be analyzed using a multiple regression analysis. So that's very straightforward, okay? You have in this theater, the mind example, 11 people, you're each given a stack of 4 measures, given we have the outcome variable and the 3 predictor variables. And you fill them out and you hand them back in. And then the researcher scores each of those measures. And when we're talking about, well, what is the data, as we talked about in the previous presentation, the data within the phrase, the fit of the model with the data, are the actual scores, the actual observed scores that you get on the measure of the outcome variable. So you handed that back in along with the measures of the predictor variables, and each of them was scored by the researcher, and you got an actual score on the measure of the outcome variable, in this example, organizational commitment. And those actual observed scores on the outcome variable, they are the data within the phrase, the fit of the model with the data. And so what you know right now then, in understanding that phrase, we're talking about the fit of the model with the data, meaning with the actual observed values, the scores you actually got on the outcome variable measure of organizational commitment. Okay, so that's where we are right now in breaking down this phrase. So let's move on. Let's move on and talk about what we mean by the model. Okay, so I'm going to go and find an eraser here. Excuse me for a moment while I do that. Okay, I'm coming over here. All right, here I am again. So we've talked about what the data is within the phrase, the fit of the model with the data. We talked about what the data is within that phrase. Now let's talk about what the model is. So, the model. Okay, straightforwardly put, the model is right here. Let me get another marker. I don't want you to miss the model. You got to see the model. So I'm going to highlight that for you here. So one moment again. Here's the model. Right there. So this whole thing, including the y hat, is the regression equation. But this part right here is the model. Okay? And what I want you to pay special attention to here in looking at the model, this right here, are the predictor variables. So x sub 1, which in this case is job satisfaction, x sub 2, which is employee salary, and x sub 3, which is positiveness of work environment. Those are the predictor variables that you are testing for their effects on the outcome variable, controlling for the effects of the other predictor variables in the model. And so in the most essential sense, and you can see there's other components here of the model. We have the constant, and we have each of the unstandardized regression coefficients. But in the most essential sense, the model is the set of predictor variables that you are testing for their effects on the outcome variable, controlling for the effects of the other predictor variables in the model. Okay, so what is the model? The model is the set of predictor variables that you are testing. Okay, testing for their effects on the outcome variable. So that's the model in the most essential sense. Now let's say a little bit more about the model. Well, first of all, we're concerned about the fit of the model with the data, which again, as we know from the previous presentation, are the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure. Okay, so what do we mean when we talk about the fit of the model with those actual observed values on the outcome variable measure? Well, we're talking about the thing that the model produces. And here's what it produces, right here, y hat. And that is a predicted value on the outcome variable measure. And how I want you to think about the regression equation and the model in particular, so this particular set of predictor variables that are being tested, is to think of the regression equation and the model as being applied to each participant in your sample. As being applied to each participant in your sample. And what is being generated mathematically out of the model is a predicted score for each participant in your sample as to their score on the outcome variable measure, a predicted score from the model as to each participant's score on the outcome variable measure. All right, now where does that predicted score from the model as to each participant's score on the outcome variable measure, where does that predicted score come from? Well, it comes from the model, but let's talk about this a little bit more specifically. Each of your participants gives you a score. Remember, you got those 4 measures back and you scored what their score was on the outcome variable measure, but you also got a score for each participant on each of the predictor variables. So for each participant, you got a score for job satisfaction and for employee salary and for positiveness of work environment. Okay? So for each participant, you got a score on each of the 3 predictor variable measures. Now, what we'll see later, I'll put up a table here for you showing you the regression model being applied to each participant in your sample. What you're going to see when I show you that is that for each participant, A is the constant. It's a constant. It's the same value across your participants. These unstandardized regression coefficient values, B sub 1, B sub 2, and B sub 3, they're fixed unstandardized regression coefficient values. They're fixed. So they also have the same value across all your participants in your sample. The only values that vary from participant to participant in your sample is each of their scores on the predictor variable measures. So it's those differences in person scores on the predictor variable measures that produce differences across your participants in the predicted value for each of the participants on the outcome variable measure. So as you go from participant to participant in your sample, you're going to have a different predicted value on the outcome variable measure. And that difference is created from differences in each participant's scores on the predictor variable measures. Okay, so that is where the predicted value on the outcome variable measure for each participant is coming from the model, giving us y hat, this predicted value, in this case on organizational commitment. That's our outcome variable measure. the differences in those predicted values from participant to participant is coming from differences in our participants' scores on each of the predictor variables. In this case, each of our 3 predictor variables. I want you to keep that in mind then, what this means. What this means is that on the outcome variable measure, we have 2 values. We have 2 values for each of our participants. One of the values is their actual observed score on the outcome variable measure. And for each of our participants, we have a second value on the outcome variable measure, and that is their predicted score from the model based on each participant's scores on the predictor variable measures. So there are 2 scores. Keep that in mind and embrace this, okay? Because it is essential to understanding fit, which we'll talk about in the next presentation. There are 2 values for each participant on the outcome variable measure. The score they actually achieved on the measure, when you got the measures back and you scored each participant on the outcome variable measure, that is their actual observed score on the outcome variable measure. That is the data. But the other value that each participant has on the outcome variable measure is the value predicted from the model. Is the value predicted from the model based on each participant's scores on each of the predictor variable measures. Keep that in mind. 2 values on the outcome variable measure for each participant, their actual observed score and the predicted score out of the model. That starts to tell you then what we mean by the fit. And that is going to be our next conversation, okay, so to speak, or talk that we have about this phrase. That starts to foreshadow or give you an idea or sense of what we mean when we talk about the fit. Because now, understanding what the model is, here's what the phrase is saying. It's saying the fit of the predicted values on the outcome variable measure from the model with the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure. All right? So now we're giving some substance to this phrase, the fit of the model with the data. We're talking about the fit of the predicted values on the outcome variable measure from the model with the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure. All right, so there you are. That is what is meant by the model. It is the set of predictor variables that we're testing. But once we acknowledge that, it also concerns the predicted values from the model on the outcome variable measure. And so then we have the predicted values from the model, we have the actual observed values on the outcome variable measure, the data, and we want to see between those 2 the fit. So our next presentation will be on the fit. All right, now, as becoming custom, I do a signature on this. So here we go. Oh, I don't like doing it in blue. I have my own signature color, which I like, and it's not blue. So I'm going to get the black marker out here. It turns out, by the way, you don't know the background on this, but it turns out this is a very special black marker. I can't give the details of why it is, but it is. So this should be a really good signature. Okay, so my producers are all getting the cameras ready for the signature. I got to keep myself in sync here with them. Otherwise they get frustrated with me. Okay, so here we go. Here is the signature. All right. Cool. And then a picture. Let's see. How am I feeling today? Well, I'm always feeling happy because I'm talking with you. Look at that big smile. I really am feeling happy because I'm talking with you. We're talking about regression. We're talking about certain essential elements of regression that are so important that can be learned through this understanding of what it really means when we use the phrase the fit of the model with the data. So, I mean, I could not be feeling anything else but happy. So there's the smile. And then let's see. I'm going to put, well, I always like to put some hair on them because at least the drawing can have hair, right? I don't have any. Well, I do have some, but you know, it's kind of deceptive in some ways in terms of the hair that you see, because there's like parts of it now that are just like starting to fall away, right? So, you know, yeah, I don't know how much longer even the illusion of my having hair is going to last. But at least this drawing here has hair. That's the best I can do nowadays in that department. Okay, so, and then what we'll do is we'll put some, people tell me, so put some bushy eyebrows over here. That's what people tell me I got, is bushy eyebrows. So we'll have that, okay, so we got some bushy eyebrows. And then we'll go ahead and we'll put like some glasses. I'm not sure how this is turning out here. That's going over my nose. I don't know how that's turning out. I don't even know. That's kind of I don't know what I make of this picture. But anyway, and then we'll go ahead with a hat. We'll just do a hat again, but now with the glasses. So we have a hat. Let's see, so we'll go like this with the hat, and then, I don't know, that's an odd looking kind of hat, isn't it? Okay. But anyway, that's the hat. Kind of looks like a squire hat, like I'm like part of Robin Hood or something. And then we'll put some, you know, just some darkness there on the hat. Okay. And I don't know, this face here looks very mischievous. Okay, I meant to look happy. It looks kind of mischievous. I'm not sure what to make of that face. But anyway, there you go. There we have it. Been wonderful talking with you. Have a good one. Next we talk about the fit.